If you could sit down with an experienced and thoughtful entrepreneur and have an hour to talk about how to become an entrepreneur, what the challenges are, what the benefits are, where can you draw ideas from, how does the personal psychology side of it work, and how it can aid your personal development, and you knew that you'd get deep, informative, and inspiring answers, would you go for it? Well, you're in luck today because you can get all that just by continuing to listen. My guest is Jake Desyllas, host of the Voluntary Life Podcast, who sold his business and now lives a job-free life, writing books, recording podcasts, and enjoying the great places this world has to offer. He wrote a book called Becoming an Entrepreneur. It is this book and his journey that we are going to talk about today. Hi Jake, and welcome to Valiant Growth.
Hi Philip, thanks for having me.
I brought you on today to talk about entrepreneurship, and you have a rich history with that. And I don't know if you're doing it presently, but if some of my listeners know you, and I know that they know you, but some of them don't. So if you could go a little bit into your background and why you are an authority on the subject, that would be great.
Sure. So I guess my experience with entrepreneurship is from starting my own business. I spent a lot of time after university doing various things. I did a lot of postgraduate research and did a PhD. And after that, I started my own business. And my field was pedestrian movement consulting. My business was a consultancy that advised on how to design better shopping centers and street networks. And we advised developers and on how to build in order to get the right amount of foot traffic to support their development. So that was what my business did. And I set that up in 2000. I didn't know very much about business at all at the time, and I made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot through the process. Really enjoyed the process, found it incredibly fulfilling, and I made an effort to consciously learn as much as I could through setting up that business and growing it. So once I got to a point where we were profitable and successful, we managed to sell the business to a large multinational engineering company. And I chose to essentially take early retirement once I'd sold that business and do whatever I like with my time, which is what I've been doing since. We sold the business in 2007. I stayed on for 3 years to help integrate the business until 2010. And since then, I've had the opportunity to really pursue whatever I feel like doing. And one of the things that I have chosen to do is write about entrepreneurship and try and distill some of those things that I learned in the process of setting up and running that business. And that's really what led me to write the book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, and what led me to look at also what kind of principles could I draw from all the things that I read from other entrepreneurs and things that worked for me, and try and sort of distill them really partly for myself to kind of get it written down, the things that I'd learned, but also hopefully to help other people who are interested in pursuing entrepreneurship too.
Who is the book for? What level of knowledge would you say it aims at?
Well, I tried to make sure that the book was as jargon-free as possible so that it could be for anyone interested in entrepreneurship from the very beginner level. But I haven't left things out that I found useful that would also benefit people who have experience in entrepreneurship. So I think it's for anyone at the beginner level interested in entrepreneurship, but also for entrepreneurs who want to get more fulfillment and have more fun in the process and want a more principled approach. But yeah, I tried to make sure that it was a book that was very much open to beginners.
Right, and that's great. And I can second that, both of them. It has both an introduction and also some advanced concepts. By the way, I was always wondering, whenever I hear your story, how did you get into pedestrian movement? It seems such an arcane field.
Yeah. Well, initially, when I was an undergraduate, I was looking for interesting things to do during the summer at university, and I found the opportunity to go to Berlin. And this is just after reunification. And I got really interested in Berlin. It was an amazing place, and I went and lived there. And I wanted to continue studying, and I thought that Berlin was really interesting. So I got involved in property market economics. I actually did a master's in property development economics, because Berlin was an amazing place where the property market was in total transition. And I went and worked there as a property market analyst for a while. And that was, I got involved in urban questions and issues to do with cities and urban development. And my father's an architect, so I had a background in that area anyway. I knew a bit about urban development just from my family. But I got involved in property market economics. And I was interested in analyzing Berlin and analyzing this change. And one of the tools that I found to help analyze changes to property markets was some computer modeling and computer simulation tools that analyze street networks. And to cut a long story short, one of the applications of this kind of tool is in predicting pedestrian modeling. So when I wanted to do a PhD, I was interested in pursuing this kind of computer simulation and modeling. And one of the main applications of that simulation is actually in predicting pedestrian flows. And as I was doing my PhD, I had the opportunity to do some consultancy work from the university itself, advising on pedestrian movement using these kind of tools. And I just saw a real opportunity to start a business in this field, because it was a field where there was a lot of demand, but there wasn't actually that many people doing things. And since then, it's actually become a lot more established. There are many different types of tools for pedestrian flow simulation and modeling now. But when I started my business, there was very little available. So I just saw an opportunity.
So were you an employee as well before you started your business? Or was it kind of this consulting thing from the very beginning?
Yeah, I was an employee for a while in Berlin when I was working in the property market as a property market analyst. And then while I was doing my PhD, I was kind of freelancing and doing consultancy work from this consultancy unit within the university. But I've never really had long periods of being an employee. I've had quite a varied work history. But I've never spent that much time being an employee, and that's partly why I wrote a book about being job-free, because most of my life I have been job-free, and I've done lots of things, but I've never really sort of spent a lot of time as an employee.
So both your life experience and the fact that you wrote, 2 books on the subject shows that you really value entrepreneurship and having job freedom. What's your pitch for being an entrepreneur?
Well, my interest was always in entrepreneurship as an opportunity to find maximum freedom and fulfillment, and to really do what you want to do. It's the personal freedom aspect that was most interesting to me, and it's beyond the opportunity to do whatever, to follow your own path every day in building the business that you think makes sense and taking responsibility for that risk as well. There's also the opportunity to gain financial freedom through it. And that was always exciting to me as well, as a really valuable goal to pursue. But my interest in entrepreneurship has always been that aspect of personal freedom. I think in terms of freedom that's achievable in your own life, entrepreneurship is an incredible opportunity to live as freely as possible. And it's also something that I think gives you the opportunity for a huge amount of personal growth and personal development, because it really does require you to take responsibility for your actions in a far more fundamental level than you do otherwise. And you take risks, and you're responsible for making things work. And in order to do that, you have to dig deep in yourself, and you have to really confront your own weaknesses and address them. And I think that is another thing that is very fulfilling about entrepreneurship, is that in a way it is a kind of personal development program too. If you address entrepreneurship and you're willing to face the challenges and the embarrassments and the personal growth that goes with it, then you come out a better person too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it seems like self-leadership is a very, very important part of personal development and probably of self-esteem as well. And I always considered that it's a pretty big obstacle to developing self-leadership if you are being led 40 to whatever, however many hours a week. That's an issue on that front.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it is that the thing that really, what I learned most was through entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is so much about selling and about trying to persuade other people to take interest in your business, to take interest in your product, to be enthusiastic about what you're doing. You have to do that every day. You have to sell. And in order to do that effectively, you actually have to take a much greater interest in people, including yourself, but also what other people want, what other people need. My interest in psychology started with entrepreneurship. It started because I wanted to understand what the people working for me really wanted, what motivated them. And it was through that process that I had to, really confront the fact that the things that I find interesting and motivating are not the same things as what a lot of other people find interesting and motivating. So I had to try harder to actually empathize with other people, understand what they wanted, and see how I could find an opportunity for example, for the people who work for me to feel fulfilled in what they're doing and still to be pushing the business forward, and for the people we wanted to sell to find value in what we were doing. So I think it's actually an opportunity to really understand more about other people and about psychology and about relationships, because it is so entrepreneurship is so relationship focused.
Yeah, I noticed in your recommended reading, Drive by Pink. I don't remember his first name.
Yes.
Was that
Pink?
Yeah. Oh yes. Was that the beginning of your journey?
Not really. I found that one relatively late on. I started off with a lot of the. It depends on which journey you're talking about. Do you mean in terms of interest in psychology and relationships?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually started off. My interest started with some of the typical tools that people use for motivational stuff within businesses. And for example, I took interest in personality testing tools like the Myers-Briggs test as a way of trying to find, okay, so what is it that motivates people working here, and what's the differences between the kind of roles and tasks that would better suit some people than others. And those tools are very crude. I mean, they're models, so they're always a simplification of things, but they were an opportunity for me to start thinking about motivation and about personality differences and about accepting that people are motivated by different things and that there are different ways that people prefer working. And that was just sort of the beginning. But having started with those kind of very simple tools, I started thinking more about fulfillment in general and, what kind of other useful concepts there are out there for how people find fulfillment. And I found Drive to be a really, really useful way of distilling this idea of intrinsic fulfillment. That there's a difference between the kind of fulfillment that you get from yourself, from the process of living your values and living the way that you want to live, as opposed to fulfillment that comes from other people, congratulating you or something like that. And Drive is a great book for sort of identifying those intrinsic motivations that you really need as an entrepreneur, because you have to be the source of so much enthusiasm. You have to be the source of so much drive for the business itself that you've got to find that from within. So I found that book relatively late in my interest in psychology, but it just really distilled that concept of intrinsic motivation very well for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a bit of a side note to personal development in a way, and in others not, but I have read that book when I was studying business management in university, and it's an absolutely fascinating book. I'm curious, how many employees did you have?
Well, it varied during the growth of the business, but it ended up being about 24.
How did you implement the idea? Did you implement the ideas in that book in your company, and how did that go? Because there are not a lot of companies, as far as I can see, that have really embraced that. So that's something that's very interesting.
Well, I can't remember exactly when I read Drive, but I think it was relatively late in the development of my business. So I didn't really design, my working relationships around those ideas of intrinsic motivation. What I did notice, some of the things that I did learn about psychology and working with people were partly that it's just so hard to tell in advance how well people are going to work together and what exactly people are going to be like. Interviewing people is one of those things where you can't tell that much from an interview about how well people are going to get on with each other and what's really going to motivate someone. And one of the things that we found was that we had an internship program within my business, and we basically trained people in using the software the kind of tools that we were using, and that was an opportunity for them to come and learn some new skills, but also contribute to projects and work with other people. And one of the things that I really found was that kind of experience-based learning about people is so much more valuable than interview techniques or personality tests or anything like that. Because a lot of the time, that's where you really see how people are going to get on and how motivated people are. And so I found that was one of the things that worked really well in terms of employing people, was actually just working together on projects as much as possible. And through things like our internship program was a way to actually see how people would get on and what people are like.
Yeah, that's so cool, because I remember reading a study not so long ago that basically looked at factors predicting job performance, and on the job, like internships or kind of trial work periods were one of the best predictors. And actually, if I remember correctly, IQ was the best. Phoning up references and kind of internships were the second and the third. I don't remember the order, and they were major chunks of job performance. And most of the things that are done in companies today, such as looking at the CV during the interview, looking at the education, were really fractional overall. So that's interesting. That kind of backs that up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I definitely experienced was that motivation and willingness to learn and attitude counts for so much. That, obviously it's great to have very intelligent people, and you need very intelligent people, especially in highly specialist roles. But the interesting thing is that if you have someone who's really intelligent but has a really bad attitude, it just doesn't work. So your approach to work and your sense of motivation, your sense of purpose counts for so much. And that's my experience both as an employer and also, in my own experience in terms of what worked for me in business, that it's because I was interested in what I was doing that I had, the stamina to keep going when things were really difficult with the business. And it's the same if you want to get a good job, your attitude just counts for so much.
Yeah, and an interesting chapter in your book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, is the one on finding the beauty and the purpose of things or goals or mission statements that are not so grandiose, that are not necessarily changing the world. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I basically wanted to write in that book about how important it was for me to find a sense of purpose in what we were doing, because it was very important to me that my business was doing something that I believed in, that, we were contributing to improving the environment for pedestrians, for people on foot, and to creating better spaces and better environments for people to live and work and enjoy and relax in. And, I found that very fulfilling, that my business was involved in something that was meaningful to me. And I think everyone who starts a business needs to find fulfillment in what it is that their business is doing. But the important thing is it doesn't have to be this earth-shattering, cure for cancer in order for you to find meaning and fulfillment in what you're doing, because everyone who contributes to providing a business which is serving customers is improving the lives of those customers. Even if it seems to be in relatively simple ways, you're still contributing to improving the lives of the people that you serve. And by doing so, you make the division of labor itself bigger and richer. And in doing so, you help improve the lives of everyone. So I think it's really important to see your business within that bigger picture and get a sense of the purpose as your motivation for what you're doing, because when you do that, it gives you the strength to get through the hard times.
Yeah, and I found that a very powerful idea, because myself, I have this podcast and I'm thinking about all sorts of entrepreneurial avenues, but when I was reading the book, and that was a while ago, that really hit me, because I had this issue where I had a number of opportunities open to me, but they all seemed kind of pedestrian. That's a good one to use.
Yeah.
They all seemed kind of boring, kind of uninspiring, and I really longed to do something that has a really deep impact. But then I read your chapter, and that really opened my eye in being able to find the beauty in many different things. And
Yeah.
you also talk about ethics in that chapter, how that influences it.
Yeah. Just on that first point of what you said, I think it's really important that you do find purpose yourself rather than what other people think is worthy. Because a lot of people get stuck in this thing where they think that they don't really question whether or not it's worthy for them to be doing an employee job where they're just earning money every day, because they just consider that to be part of life. But they think, oh, well, I'm not going to leave this job to start my own business unless I'm doing something that, is going to really wow everyone with being this earth-shattering, life-changing, humanity progressing role that I would have. And the key thing about it is it's up to you to find the meaning in what you're doing. And it's up to you to find the beauty in the way that you put it there, not for other people to tell you whether or not it's important that you are creating, a much friendlier pizza delivery service in your area or whatever it is, right? It's not up to other people to tell you whether or not that helps humanity. It's up to you to find the meaning in it itself. And even if you start off with something that you think is, not where you want to ultimately be, you can use that experience to learn about helping people, serving customers, understanding people better, having systems, identifying ways of being conscious of what you're doing in a business. And you can use it as a stepping stone to the future. But it's your job, I think, as an entrepreneur to really be enthusiastic about the purpose of your business, because otherwise, why should anyone else be? And that's, I think, the key is that once you're enthusiastic about it, if you think that there's meaning in creating a stationery company, then you can express that and you can explain to people why it is that your stationery company, is going to help people connect. It's going to, bring more love into their lives, or whatever it is that you find meaning in it, rather than just, I've started a stationery company. I don't know if it's really very important. You know what I mean? It's actually your job to do that. And I think the other thing that you mentioned was the ethics aspect, and there's a lot to say about it, but the basic point that I wanted to make in this book again and again is that entrepreneurship gets such a bad press so often, and people have a suspicion of business in general and think that business is about ripping people off. And the important thing to me is that being an entrepreneur is actually a way of expressing and living your ethics and living your values. You can choose to be principled, and you can demonstrate through your actions that you're principled. And in fact, given that entrepreneurship is all about finding voluntary customers, it is an absolutely ethical way to live. And it can be a really ethical opportunity to help improve the lives of others, all through voluntary action.
Yeah, and if you're thinking through a win-win perspective, it suddenly becomes a very, very noble endeavor. But yeah, there's this view plaguing society about businesses abusing their customers and tricking them into buying things. And there are certainly businesses that do it, but I don't think that's the majority. And there's a choice there on the part of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, and the analogy that I use in the book is that, there are people who write books about dating that are manipulative, like, how to get someone to sleep with you by, using psychological manipulation. Sure, there are people who think like that, but that doesn't mean that dating itself is in any way immoral or manipulative. Dating is just dating, and there are some people who take that approach to it, but that doesn't actually reflect on the process of dating per se. And it's the same with entrepreneurship. Sure, there are some people who are unprincipled entrepreneurs, and to a certain extent the market is actually very good at weeding them out, because you're not going to be successful in business if you're trading on a market if you keep ripping people off, because people won't come back and you need repeat sales. But even though there are some people who are unprincipled who go into business, that doesn't actually reflect on business and the process of selling itself. It's perfectly possible to be a principled salesperson and to be a principled entrepreneur.
Right, I love how you're transitioning into all of the topics that I want to talk about. But before I go there, I want to say that for people who are skeptical of entrepreneurship, they probably could use a healthy dose of the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Maybe that will change their minds. Although it's a big dose. So selling. A lot of people are very reluctant to sell, and I was very reluctant to sell myself. If I remember correctly, you were too.
Yeah, definitely.
So why is that, and how can it be overcome?
Well, I think from my own experience, I was reluctant to sell because there's an opportunity of rejection and failure. And people are afraid of that. At least I was, and I'm pretty sure that's what most people, find uncomfortable about selling. Selling is you're going to hear people say no a lot, and you're going to hear people actually even more than just saying no. You can hear a lot of people who are just not going to be interested in what it is that you're trying to get them interested in, and so it is a psychologically challenging thing to do, because you have to try and persuade people. And you have to be willing for them to be not persuaded and not interested, and learn from that. And there's embarrassment in that, and it's difficult. So that's why I think people want to avoid it, because it's psychologically hard to not take things personally and to not think about things as being a reflection on you and your character, but rather to try and actually get outside, your preoccupation with yourself and think about things more objectively. Okay, well, why doesn't this person want this product that I'm selling? What is it that they really need? What haven't I understood about what they're trying to achieve in their own life, and about what they would need in order to succeed? And what can I do to provide that for them? In order to be successful in that way, you have to really get out of your own preoccupation with yourself. So it's an enormous chance for personal growth, but it's also deeply uncomfortable. And selling immediately exposes all of our personal failings. It's an really interesting psychological experience in that way, that if you find it difficult to be nice to other people and to be empathetic and to understand them and to be helpful, selling will immediately expose that, and it will force you to actually become a more interested, curious, compassionate, empathetic, and also it will force you to become a stronger person too, because in order to sell, it's not just about being empathetic. You actually have to have a lot of strength and self-belief, and as I said, not take things personally, in order to hear what people are saying and process the information without it becoming, all about you. And so I think it's a really powerful learning process but it's psychologically hard, and that's ultimately why people don't like doing it.
How do you solve the psychological side of that? I'm guessing part of it is just getting used to it, but is there more there?
Well, I mean, I think it's a long and complicated process, but ultimately the thing that really strikes me is whether or not you are willing to go through that process. You know, it's like learning a foreign language. If you want to learn a foreign language, you will go through a period where it is embarrassing, where you're trying to say things and you kind of say something that vaguely resembles what you meant, but isn't really, you know, you can have, when I first learnt German, I was living in Berlin at the time, and I would listen to conversations where I would understand 5% of what was being said. And a lot of the time I just sort of sat there with a blank look on my face, listening to people, trying to find an opportunity to take part in the conversation. And then when I did see an opportunity and finally had understood what people were talking about, they'd already moved on, you know, long past. But I was so interested in learning German that I was willing to sit through conversations where I only understood 5%, so I could get to 6% and then 7% and 8% and so on and so forth. And that's, I think that willingness with selling is also the really important thing. Selling started to work for me when I took interest in it as an activity, and when I started to actually think of this not just as a duty that I had to fulfill that was kind of, you know, oh, I suppose I better do some selling, but when I actually took an interest in getting better at it and in understanding what I needed to do, what was working and what wasn't, and really taking fulfillment from the process of getting better at it.
And it took you some time, right? You weren't doing a lot of sales in the beginning?
No. I mean, like many entrepreneurs who get funding, and I borrowed money, one of the things about funding is that it's actually a really dangerous thing, because funding gives you the opportunity to avoid things that you don't want to do because you have money. And so, for example, when I started my business, I borrowed a lot of money and I spent the money developing software and doing other things that were interesting, which ultimately it worked out and things were fine. But it also was, having that funding enabled me to not start selling until I ran out of money and really, really needed to get better at doing it. So, you know, that's one of the things that it's easy to avoid doing the uncomfortable tasks, and you will get to a point ultimately when you can't avoid certain things any longer, and that's either when you adopt a different attitude and you adapt to what it is that you need to do, which is what happened for me, or you give up, which is also what happens a lot.
Yeah, and I think something that in your situation made it especially challenging was the fact that you were building this software product, and I'm guessing it took significant amounts of time to have it polished and really working. So I assume you had to have that extra level of vulnerability when you were selling, that this is not the complete product, this is still in progress. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's always one of the really tricky interesting puzzle piece problems of entrepreneurship, is that, you know, you need money before you can sell in order to develop the thing that you're going to sell. But then on the other hand, you don't know whether or not anyone's going to buy it before you develop it. So it's one of those, it's the risk in entrepreneurship. But I think what I also learned from the process is that you can always do a lot more than you think to help other people. And there's always a kind of beta version of your product, if you like, that can still provide value to customers without you developing everything to the final extent. And I mean, in a way, this is the whole idea of the minimum viable product. You know, that it's really healthy to start selling as soon as possible with the minimum development of your product, so that you can actually start getting customer feedback and adapting your product to fit what it is that people really need. And that's something that I learned through experience, but I think it would, you know, looking back on it, I think it's going to be helpful for other people who are going into business to try and bear that in mind more consciously, that you want to get to selling as quickly as possible with the minimum viable product, so that you can start getting feedback as quickly as possible and improving what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to me that if you're doing something, a service, kind of an individual service, something like, say, coaching, then actually the minimum viable product is you. You're in beta version. It's a minimum viable me. That's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, for example, if you're coaching people, then, you can at least start getting feedback from people. You can coach people for free and start getting feedback on whether or not you've actually been helpful. And you can start coaching people on a cheap rate and getting feedback about what it is that you can provide better, before you build an incredibly expensive website or whatever it, that's not obviously not very expensive thing to do, but you understand what I'm saying. You can start getting feedback from customers immediately, and that will help you identify what it is that you need to do in order to be able to have, a more profitable business.
Yeah, yeah, and we're kind of moving backwards here in the timeline, and that's great because I want to ask you to. It might be tricky, maybe it isn't, but very rarely do entrepreneurs talk about the actual beginning steps, the early steps, something that I feel that many people are confused about and cannot really fathom, and this includes myself, or included myself for a long time, is how do you begin? So say that you're an employee. How do you start a business? What are the actual steps to it? How do you start working on it? I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I feel that many people have a block there. They don't know how to make that jump. So once you have the company, you have to do marketing, sales, product development, etc. But how do you begin?
Well, I think one of the things to say about it is that, the consultancy, the pedestrian movement consultancy, was not the first business that I thought about starting. I tried or got interested and explored a whole range of different ideas through my 20s for other businesses too. This was back in the 90s, and for example, it was in the period when the MP3 format had just started. And at the time, I was also playing guitar. I was interested in music, and one of the things I looked at was some kind of online music hosting and an online music site, and that was something that I looked into, and I didn't have the expertise and didn't know enough about the marketplace and didn't have an edge to really take that business forward. But I spent quite a lot of time looking at it. Another one was, it was also during the 90s, the early stages of virtual reality. And because I was in computer simulation and computer modeling, I knew something about VR and I knew something about the technology. And I explored various business opportunities related to VR. So it's not like you're going to, sit there pondering something and then finally you're going to come across the perfect idea and then you go into action. You may find that you have a whole bunch of ideas and none of them pan out when you start looking into them. And that's fine, because it is a trial and error process of discovering what it is that you really see a great opportunity in doing. And I think it's important to be willing to explore that stuff. The key is, of course, how can you determine as quickly as possible and with as least risk and effort as possible whether or not you're onto something that is really a great opportunity. That is where I think the selling as quickly as possible comes into it too. For example, looking at those previous businesses that I just described, what would I have needed to get in place in order to start selling? Quite a lot for those initial businesses, especially back then in the 90s when we're talking about the early stages of things like music hosting online and the early stages of VR. There's quite a lot that would need to be in place, and I just realized that I just didn't have an edge. And so one of the things that I write about in the book is in trying to work out where you do have a potential edge to start a business. There are various things that you can think about. You can think about, for example, do you have industry knowledge? Do you really understand the industry that you want to go into? I didn't understand the music industry or the online hosting industry, but I did understand quite a lot about urban development because my family has been in that area, and because I'd done a PhD in that area. And so, the business that I ended up starting, I had a much, much more industry knowledge. You can also look at whether or not you have expertise that is unique or highly valuable. And as I say, I did have this expertise in computer simulation, whereas I didn't have that for some of the other businesses that I was interested in starting. So there are things like that you can do to think about whether or not, you are going to have an opportunity within a particular area. But it's not a clean, it's not like I can give you the 5 steps and then you've got your business started. It's actually, you may find that you think of 100 bad ideas for businesses and you try out a whole bunch of those in the early sort of research and development stages until you come across something that you really see that you have, a unique opportunity in.
Yeah, that's, I had my own share of these, and unfortunately I'm not an international soup on the go franchise owner. That was one of the business plans that I developed, but didn't go through. So what about, I have many young listeners, and they might be coming out of public education, and you might say, as you just did, what do you know? What industry? Where are you? They might say, I don't really know much, and I wouldn't blame them given what they went through. What would you suggest to them if someone is thinking, I don't know what to do?
Well, the 3 things that I have written about that I think it's worth bearing in mind, and this is true even at the very early stages. I mentioned 2 of them. There's the industry knowledge, specific expertise, and the third one is customer empathy. And that really can be something that if you are interested in starting a business, you may find that there's something that you want that doesn't exist, that you understand, or even better, that other people want that doesn't exist. Because often things that we're interested in ourselves may not be that interesting to others. But if you notice that there's an unfulfilled need, that people are interested in something but they can't get it, that's a great place to look for opportunities. Because that's where, if you really understand what it is that people need, if you need it yourself, then you are going to be in a great position to design a business around fulfilling that need. And if you don't feel like you have enough expertise or enough industry knowledge, then you can go and get a job and work in an area that you're interested in to get some of that industry knowledge. One of the best things that you can do from your early career is make contacts in an industry and understand how the industry works. Even if you're in a job that you find boring in itself, if you take an interest in how the business works and understand, what it is that your boss's problems are, and his or her boss, and the business as a whole, what are the pain points for this bigger organization? You may well find that the fact that you were on the inside and the fact that you could see that, that every day there's this same problem that nobody's sorted and the business is too big and cumbersome to sort it out themselves. But if somebody were to provide a solution, then they would definitely need it. That's a great opportunity to use your time in any job. And it's also a way to make any menial job that you end up having to do just to get money in the beginning, you can make that a great opportunity, a fact-finding opportunity to basically do your research, use it as if this were your opportunity to see inside an industry and, take the opportunity to talk to people, ask your boss what their problems are. What are the things that this business really needs? Because the other thing is, if you do that, employers will totally notice those employees that actually take an interest in the business, because most people don't. But if you actually take an interest in understanding, why do we make money and why don't we make money? What is it that we lose money on? What are our problems as a business? What makes us different? If you really take the time to understand those things, you will find the holes. The thing about business is that there's so much to do there's so much to concentrate on, and everybody has to specialize in what they do best in order just to survive. So that means that whatever industry you go into, you will see holes and you will see bits that are not really working as well as they could, because there's so many problems that aren't really the core focus of a business that they need help with, but that they don't have the time to sort out in a better way. So that's what you can do. Even if you don't feel like you have a lot of skills, you can use your early jobs always as an opportunity, because even if they're menial, they're always a chance to learn.
Yeah, and that is some great advice. And you kind of covered the kind of umbrellaed the whole thing, because starting out from yourself and your needs and perhaps the people around you can be a great foundation, or at least a great attempt for a business to consumer company, whereas gathering information from like inside the company is obviously a more business to business focus, unless you want to offer therapy services to your boss or something like that. Do you think there's a difference in difficulty in these two areas? Is it preferable to start in one or the other, or what do you think about that?
I'm not sure which two areas you're referring to. You're talking about business to business or business to consumer?
Yes.
Well, I find it hard to generalize totally, because there's different challenges in each. I was business to business, and one of my challenges with my business was really understanding what it was that, for example, shopping center developers really need, because I'm not a shopping center developer and never was one. And consequently, I needed to understand, okay, when in the process of developing a shopping center are you going to be interested in pedestrian movement modeling and simulation and consulting? When would you buy that? And why would you buy it? And how would you buy it? How would that work? So I had to work out those kind of questions and understand that by talking to customers. Obviously, it's different if you're developing a product for end consumers and you have much more of an opportunity to kind of use your own experience as an end consumer to inform what it is that you're doing, even though there's risks in that too, because you might end up designing something that's, fitting your own particular needs, but actually not what other people need. So I think it's difficult to generalize in total, but because there are different challenges to each of those routes. And it really depends on what your circumstances are and what it is that you manage to get yourself interested in and excited about and feel like you've got an opportunity. Bearing in mind that, ultimately you're the one as the entrepreneur who's either going to make it work or not make it work, because there's so much. It's not so much about whether or not an opportunity is just going to be presented to you. You actually create the opportunity yourself through your own hard work, and consequently, your attitude is actually really significant in determining your success.
Right. So we touched upon this quite a number of times, but if you were to sum it up, so Valiant Growth focuses a lot on personal development. What are the benefits of entrepreneurship when it comes to personal development? Is it a worthy investment of time, or should you instead sit at home and read books and listen to podcasts and do journal?
I think one of the things that I've noticed about personal development is that self-reflection is very important. It is important to reflect and be able to internally have a dialogue and work out what's going on for yourself. But social life is so important, and your interaction with other people, your relationships is such a core part of what it means to be alive, that self-reflection on its own is a bit like practicing football on your own, and to a certain degree, it's important to be able to do self-reflection. But entrepreneurship it's the equivalent of going out there and actually practicing with other people. Because when you do entrepreneurship, you are always involved in personal relationships, in trying to persuade people. And in doing that, you challenge yourself to be the kind of person that you want to be. And that's what's really valuable about it, is that it puts you out there in the world, interacting with the world in a way that is a different type of personal development challenge. And I think it helps you to really become the best version of yourself that you can be in terms of the kind of person that you want to be in your life, because you have to if you want to go out there and succeed. So that's the way that I view it in terms of its relationship to personal development.
Yeah, I find it in my experience that it's a little bit cyclical. I have periods when I prefer more introspection, and there are periods when I prefer being more out in the world, and they kind of feed off one another. When being more introspective starts to become stale, then I can gather a lot of new input from the world that I can process again. And I haven't managed to combine the two where they're happening simultaneously, but perhaps that will happen in the future. Did you experience this kind of cyclicality in your life?
Well, I'm not sure that I've experienced quite what you're describing, but what I will say is that one of what I have experienced with entrepreneurship, another thing that comes to mind for me about this is that the key thing is, in order to succeed as an entrepreneur, in a way, you have to get over yourself. You know, you have to actually stop being preoccupied with your own history and needs and your own damage and problems. And the only way to do that is actually to work through that stuff and to get to a point where you can become a person that isn't constrained by that history and your own needs and your own preoccupations. And in a way, that's the humility that you get through going into business, that other people have their own lives and they're not interested in your personal problems. They're interested in their lives. And consequently, in order to overcome your own limitations, you have to sort of overcome your problems and actually take interest in other people and in the world outside you. So it's a strange kind of process that through entrepreneurship, you actually are forced to overcome your own limitations and to move the focus from the bad things that have happened to you in the past into the life that you're actually living now and the reality that you do have now. And one of the things that I think that can happen with introspection is that people can get stuck in introspection where they can start. I mean, obviously it's very different. Some people never introspect and they don't really even look at their own history and their own difficulties in life. But if you do look at your own history and difficulties in life, at some point you actually have to overcome those things. And at some point you have to get to a place where you're living the life that you want to live. And entrepreneurship kind of forces you to get on with that. And so that's what I think is really exciting about it.
What kind of skills do you develop that then you can take and adapt to your personal life?
The main one that comes to mind for me is negotiation. You definitely develop negotiation skills through selling and entrepreneurship. But the other thing is that I've sort of talked about a lot of these things, but you develop the ability to act more rationally and not take things personally and try to step outside the limits of your own history so that you don't, as I've spoken about before, you don't take not making a sale personally, but you're able to think, oh, I wonder why that didn't work. Let me think about what else I can do. And let me gather some statistics on, what the likelihood of sales working in this area and that area and so forth. So it's an opportunity for you to apply rational thinking to your problems in life and to not take things as personally and get to a point where you are more able to overcome your own preoccupations.
Right. So now that you sold your company, do you consider the things that you do now? And what I know of is your podcast, The Voluntary Life, and your authoring of books. Do you consider these entrepreneurship as well? And do you do other things?
Yeah, I would say that I'm probably, if you look at the book that I did, Job Free, what I'm doing now is probably unjobbing. I pursue those things that are fulfilling to me, and writing the books is fulfilling to me. And I do want people to read the books, but I'm also writing them because it's meaningful to me to try and contribute and push forward ideas that I think are going to be helpful to people. And so that's, I'm basically able now to use the time that I have, having sold my business, to pursue those projects that are most fulfilling to me. And in a way, I don't have the same commercial pressure that I had when I was running the consultancy company. It gives me a lot more freedom to do whatever I want with my day. And that in itself has its own challenges, because then the question is, okay, well, what are you going to do with your day? And in order to answer that question, I've had to think a lot more about finding purpose in life and about what's meaningful to me and about what I want from life. And so I've had an opportunity through having sold my business to reflect on some of those more philosophical questions about life and fulfillment. And that's what's driven me doing the writing that I do, because I hope to help other people to find more freedom in their own lives. And that's what's fulfilling for me. So that's why I've chosen, for example, to do the podcast and write the books.
Are you working on any new interesting project that you can mention here?
Yeah, I've got a whole series of writing projects that I'm working on at the moment, but I'm still in the sorts of research and development stages. So one of the things that I talk about a lot on the podcast is my approach to minimalism, and I'm writing a book about about essentially extreme decluttering, getting rid of all the stuff that doesn't help bring me fulfillment, which is the process that I've been through in the last few years. I had an opportunity after selling the business to think, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Am I going to buy a yacht, or am I going to, buy a sports car? These are the kind of things that people tend to do once they've sold a business. And funnily enough, I actually ended up with quite the opposite lifestyle. I now have much less stuff than I had before I sold my business. I now fit all of my possessions into one suitcase and one carry-on bag. And that's been a process over the last few years that I've gone through, because I've actually found it incredibly liberating and fulfilling to be less focused on stuff. And so I've spoken about this quite a lot in the podcast, and I'm writing this up as another book, but I also have a number of other writing projects that I'm working on simultaneously. And what I'm doing at the moment is still, because I'm still in the research stages, I'm kind of doing research and writing things up and getting to a point later where I'll focus on actually publishing one of the ones that I'm working on at the moment.
That's great, and I'm really looking forward to it, because the two books that I've read from you are some of the best written books out there. I have no trouble saying that. And you really manifest minimalism in the books. They're concise, and I just enjoy them very much. So I really recommend listeners to check them out if they haven't already.
Oh, thank you.
So I'll put links to them. I'll probably have valiantgrowth.com/becoming for becoming an entrepreneur, and I will have valiantgrowth.com/jobfree for job free.
Great.
Where can people find your podcast, Jake?
They can find the podcast at thevoluntarylife.com, and there's links there to other things too. Books and so forth. So yeah, everything they can find is at thevoluntarylife.com.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Philip. It's been a pleasure.